Tidings of corruption. Hello, everyone. We are here. It is Sunday evening. Come on in, everyone. Hope everyone's doing good this evening. You're here. You made it through the weekend. Here in Ontario, we got a good amount of snow. Some of us, anyway. Sorry, guys. Just sending out invites here. Don't forget to like and share the stream, you guys. We're getting there. All right. Come on in, everyone. Come on in. Duke, good to see you, Duke. Hope you're doing well on this Sunday evening. Come on in, everyone. Anthony, good to see you. Come on in, everyone. Just hanging out before I actually start the show. I start at 8 o'clock Eastern. So just hanging out, getting people to come in. Corruption green. Good evening, Nat. Thanks for joining. Just hanging out before I get going. Hope your weekend has been good. Hope the weather hasn't been too crazy where you are. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. Like I said, just hanging out for a moment here, waiting for everyone to show up, guys. They start at 8 o'clock. And today I have an interview with Art Lightstone. It's going to be a great episode, great live, guys. So if you're here, stick around. You're not going to want to miss it. Hoping we can get more people show up and get things going. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome, 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 everyone. Don't forget to like and share the stream, guys. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am the Progressive Moose, starting the show at 8 o'clock. So, by all means, pull up a chair, pull up a seat, get comfortable, and stick around. Nat, I am sitting down and interviewing Art Lightstone from not Good Neighbor, but Green Neighbor. He has quite the education. He was a teacher for, I believe, 30 years, as well as he's an activist in so many different ways. He's got so much knowledge to go behind his activism. which is fantastic. So I'm going to be having a conversation with him tonight and just getting into his work and what he does and how he goes about doing it and everything that he does. So it's going to be a great night, great conversation. Please stick around. Hope everyone's going to enjoy it. Let's see here, guys. I got to send out some more invites apparently. Get people on board, get people moving around. Come on in, everyone. Pull up a chair and get comfy. We will make this show work. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Come on in. Guys, don't forget to like and share the stream. Let's get it out there that we're here. Just sending out some more invite, guys. Bear with me as I get some more sent out and going. My phone isn't liking me right now. Bear with me. There we go. Getting those invites out. And there is Art, the man of the hour. Sent you an invite to come up, Art. You should see it there in your bottom corner. Like and share the stream, guys. Let's get it going. Art's here. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. We got a bit of time before the show actually starts. Hello, Art. I sent you an invite to come on up. I don't know if you got it. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I have Art Lightstone with me today. Art, if you can't find my invite to come up, there should be a way for you to request to come up, actually, down in your bottom left-hand corner, I believe, of your screen. Real Canadian Beavers Club, hello. Thanks for coming. Perfect. Hey, guys, and welcome. Thanks for coming by, guys. Still got a bit of time before the show actually starts. So like and share the stream, guys. Let's get people aware that we're here. It's going to be fantastic. All right, let me see if I can send you another invite to come up there, Art. Uh, oh, what's going on here? You should be. Let me see here. There we go. All right, I'm going to send you an invite. There you go. You should have just got an invite to come up. Art.
Yeah,
Hey, hey, there we
that
go.
worked.
Art.
How's it going, Moose?
Not too bad. How you doing, buddy? Let me
I'm
turn
doing
this
well.
music up.
I'm doing well. I've been busy.
I hear you on that one.
I've been painting. We finally changed the floors in our house after 28 years.
Oh, nice.
Ripped out that 28-year-old carpet and, installed some engineered hardwood. And now I've been painting. I'm taking the opportunity to paint.
There you
So,
go.
some late nights, a lot of late nights.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Sounds like some of the projects I'm going to be getting into with my brother. He just renewed their mortgage and is going to put some money into redoing the place. So that's going to be one of my projects coming up. I think in the spring we're going to start working on that stuff.
Well, good fun, you know. I uh,
Hmm.
I get to learn some of the things I learned. I get to use some of the things I learned as a kid. You know, building building our house. Um, yeah, so decades go by and you don't use any of that those skills sometimes, and then something comes up and all of a sudden you're into carpentry, you're into painting, you're into drywall, you're whatever,
Yeah.
electrical, plumbing, whatever. So it's handy to have, you know, a little insight in how that stuff works.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I do a lot of different things. Some stuff that I won't touch just because I know I don't know enough and I don't want to mess with it is plumbing and electrical. But I mean,
Right.
otherwise, like I've done bricklaying, I've done general contracting, I've done, repair work, I've done yada, 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 right? So it's always good to have some knowledge so you can at least kind of have the base and work off of that, right?
And you know, to your point, there's a very profound connection, I think, between day to day life, day to day experience, just doing stuff, and politics. So take just as an example, and I'm sorry if if you had a plan for today's discussion or whatever, and I'm going off that plan. But just as we're discussing it, as you know, before the official start of
Yeah, absolutely.
the live stream, I I can't help but think of characters like Donald Trump, for example, and how he can seem to be so utterly naive about things, like saying stuff like, "Oh, why maybe we could just drink this, you know, this stuff, this, antibacterial cleaner, and maybe that would, you know, kill all the bacteria in us. You know, why not? Could we do that? Or, you know, oh, they were, you know, they took over the airports and so on in the American War of Independence. Or stealth fighters are literally invisible to the naked eye, you know, stuff like that. How does a grown man get to be that naive? And my theory is, it's just a theory, but my theory is lack of real world experience. And I mean like the kind of stuff you were just talking about. Painting, drywall, doesn't matter, anything helps to calibrate a person's sense of reality, of what is realistic and and what is reasonable. And if you don't have that kind of just real life experience, just making your way in the world, then you're going to make a lot of naive kind of errors in judgment and so on about the real world. I don't think that can be helped. So that's my theory about Donald Trump. I think he just has, you know, when you've lived a life of wealth and opulence and every need you've ever had has just been taken care of by your staff, then how could you really have a sense of how the real world works? Just my
Yeah.
theory.
No, absolutely, and I think you're absolutely correct on that sort of stuff. His um, well, lack for better words, privilege, absolutely stops him from understanding the life of, again, for lack of better words, everyday Americans and those that he, says that he stands up for and is rallying for, sort of thing, right? Um,
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. All right, guys, so we're at 8 o'clock. We got 5 people here. Guys, like and share the stream. Let's get people here. I'm gonna give it a couple more minutes and then we'll get jump into things. So guys, get the word out that we're here. I'm so happy to have Art with me tonight. Um, and I look forward to the conversations we get into having because I think he's got a lot of knowledge and a lot of know-how in a lot of different ways that I think we can all benefit from sitting and having a conversation with him tonight. Um, so again, like and share the stream, guys, and see if we can get a couple more people in anyway, and we'll get going. And I'm sure more people will join as we get into things. Um, so I just wanted again to thank you, Art, for joining me tonight.
Oh,
Um,
it's my pleasure.
you, your content, honestly, I've been watching both on TikTok and YouTube, and
Mm.
I will say your YouTube is fantastic. Your production of your videos is, again, for lack of better words, and I apologize, amazeballs. Okay, you do a
You're very
really
kind.
good job at creating your content on everywhere, really. So, guys, again, it's Art Lightstone from Green Neighbor. So, if you haven't followed him yet, he's here on TikTok, he's on YouTube, he's on Instagram. Pretty much, if there's a platform, guys, he's on it. So, get on it. I do want to point to a couple things before we get started. Um, Couple videos that I stick out to me that Art has made, and I believe are so full of information and facts um, pertaining to different topics. So the one that I really love and is at the top of my list is climate deniers or con artists. You had posted that one about a month ago on YouTube,
Mm.
and I honestly I love how you make the connections in the video to the different people involved, like Dr. Richard Lindzen, Dr. William Harper, and how connections to PragerU
Right.
are involved in on that one. And it really goes to show how all these different people or platforms are, come together and kind of bolster each other and get that misinformation just, out the door and spread more widely. So I really love that video, guys. So go check that one out. And of course, your mini doc, I believe you called it to me, was your Confessions of a Former Conservative.
Yeah, I'd been toying with the idea of making a video like that, and then one day when I was kind of cleaning up, I found that card. You know that that literally had. I was a card carrying member of the Conservative Party, and I came across that card, and then I thought, well, I've got to make that video. I've got to use this. I've got to use this card, and I what I try to do in videos is avoid asking people to believe something, but rather figure out how can I prove this? Some whether it's some technical thing like, well, can FSD beta on a Tesla work while you've got a ski rack attached to the back of it? Well, I'm going to attach that ski rack and go driving and see if it'll work. And I'll try to figure out a camera angle that can show in one shot that FSD beta is connected and the ski rack is on the back of the car. Like I try to prove things. If I talk about, hey, you can save money using a heat pump over your gas furnace, I'll show people my bills from, across the whole year, from before I had a heat pump and then for a whole year after I had a heat pump. Because in today's day and age, you can't just ask people to believe stuff. And I think that's the way it should be. You need to be able to figure out how to prove things. And that's what I try to do. So, anyways, when I found that card, I was like, yes, I can prove. Like, I'm not just saying this. I used to be a conservative, like card carrying member. And that just seemed like a good way to start off that that film, um, and then talk a bit about my genesis, how why I was a conservative, and then why I just kind of I realized I can't support, I cannot support this party. I cannot support even conservative. A lot of what I would call the foundational principles of capital C conservatism. And to my mind, that is simply maintenance of wealth, power and privilege. That's the core of it, and everything else is just window dressing. Everything, they don't care about LGBTQ, this or that. I don't think they really care. I, and just to be clear about that, I'm not saying every conservative person doesn't care about these different issues about abortion or, uh, transgender athletes. I'm sure there are many conservative people who genuinely care about those issues. But the parties, they don't care. They're just looking for ways to get votes. Like well, they can't obviously market their their party by saying, well, here, if you're a billionaire, you want to vote for us, we're in your corner. Because there just aren't that many billionaires. So they've got to figure out ways to appeal to the public at large. And so they come up with whatever they can. So some of those side issues I agree with. But the core principle of conservatism, no, I don't. And then beyond that, there was the issue of climate change, which the party does not even acknowledge. So sorry, I'm out. I can't be a conservative at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. Gives us a lot more context in terms of kind of where you're coming from, especially given your background and education at this point. Guys, I did a promo for Art coming on today, and um, I've got the list here. I got to try and surf through a bit, but I mean, he's got quite the list of credentials in terms of his education post secondary. Um, Art was a teacher for, I believe, was it 20 or 30 years, Art?
30 years, I did my full time, got to my 85 factor, and I'm very privileged to, have worked in a field that, provided a pension, Yet another issue that is so important, and is another area where the middle class are just getting slammed. I don't know what their percentages are now, but I'm sure it's in the minority, of working people that have a pension. Besides the Canada Pension Plan, I mean, like a separate.
A substantive through the
Yeah,
company pension plan.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, and
yeah.
I think most times at this point, you only see the pension plans, I shouldn't say only, but the vast majority is through unions and unionized workplaces, right? Um, so all that
Yes,
being said,
yeah.
all that being said, Art, now you're a retired teacher. You have all this knowledge under your belt, and you're you're extensive in terms of what you're an activist for, and your knowledge on different things. So, can you give us a bit of a, um, I guess, moderate to deep dive on all the different things that you are an activist for, and things that you feel strongly about making sure your voice or the information that you bring to the table gets heard.
Yeah, sure. Probably the first issue that I became active on was public debt. And that's when I still identified as a conservative.
Hmm.
Then very quickly, I, I don't even, to tell you the truth, I don't typically think of myself as conservative or progressive or liberal or democratic or Republican. I just I just want to be reasonable. I'm just a reasonable guy. That's how I think of myself. So so other issues that I just thought, well, this just isn't reasonable. Casualization of labor. That was another issue I started to get active on a number of years ago, and I even started, contacting people, getting inside information from you know the 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 unions essentially at colleges, and getting stats about the percentage of their faculty that had become casualized. Like, it's incredible. So you really see that phenomenon in post-secondary educational institutions. So it used to be, hey, if you were a university professor, wow, wow, that's amazing. You've you've got it made. You're at the pinnacle of success. If you're a university professor, that is just not the case for the vast majority of university professors now, and it's certainly not the case for college instructors. So
Mhm.
that was a file I really, I really felt quite passionate about. The another issue is, of course, the housing crisis. Um, once once I started seeing, I guess it was about 15 years ago, uh, what was happening to the real estate market, and how more and more Canadians were just getting edged out of any possibility of ever owning a home. I just thought, wow, we've got to start working on this. So yeah, there's the real estate market, public debt, casualization of labor. Um, but then as I learned more and more about climate change, I just thought, oh, like, I can't I can't divide my time equally. At least, I'm not going to ignore those other issues, but I can't divide my time equally amongst all these things because climate change is just the front burner item. None of these other things, as serious as they are, they're just not going to matter. If we push the planet kind of beyond the limits of where it could possibly recover. In other words, if there's something like 12 tipping points that have been identified, and five of them seem to already have been activated, and that means they're probably going to tip. And
Mhm.
what that means is they're going to change from one stable state to another stable state. We're not talking. I'm not necessarily saying, well, it's going to be runaway climate change, but a good analogy would be like a chair. That's a really neat analogy. You could tip over a chair, kind of push it. So yeah, have you ever leaned back on a chair and then fallen? I've done it. I've done it in a restaurant on my 12th birthday or something like that. I remember my arms were caught behind the chair and I was trapped like a turtle on its back or something. So you can push a chair so far and you'll be fine. You could always just tip it back. But if you push it too far, you're going over. And then the chair will land on its back on the floor and now it's in another stable state. So that's essentially what's happening to our climate. And but that next stable state is as useless to us as a chair that's sitting back, like lying on the floor on its back. It
Mhm.
won't act as a chair anymore. It's still there. It's still a chair, and our planet will still be here. It'll still be a planet, but it won't support like civilization. There'd probably be a few human beings scampering around. I'm not exactly sure how they'd survive, but they'd probably figure out a way. But civilization would be gone. So
Abs-
so that's why that had to become my front burner item, if you will.
Absolutely. And I think thank you for that because it really gives us a really good perspective as to your perspective and your priorities in that sense. And really, that just answered my next question because I was going to ask what your kind of main focus right now was, and you
Oh
just
yeah,
answered it.
absolutely.
Can I interject for a
Yeah, yeah.
second?
For sure.
Okay. So I hope you got something from what he said, which is that you can't fight too many battles all at once. I hope you progressives are listening very attentively to that message because you guys don't seem to be grasping that message at all.
Well, I think we do, and that's where, I
No,
mean,
you don't. You
individuals, you could
don't.
argue, focus on different things at different times, and I'm just going to mute you because you're not going to talk over me. But that's where we focus on different things at different times. Like, I focus more on corporate greed and corporate corruption. That's a lot of what I deal with when it comes to my content and what I focus on in general. Art absolutely seems like he's more focused on the climate change aspect of things, but he also does focus on other things, just not to the same extent. Because the fact is, we can focus on more than one thing at a time. Like, we have the ability. It's not like we need to focus on one thing. He's right in terms of the importance of climate change and what we're seeing, and the stress of how important it is to actually do something about climate change. That's that's clear, right? But I mean, it doesn't mean that we can only solely focus on that. I mean, we have the ability. It's like when we hear conservatives argue that, oh, well, we spend too much here, we spend too much there. Why are we spending so much money on so many different things? Well, we have the ability to focus on more than one thing at a time, right? So this nonsense of you need to focus better, I'm sorry, no, like, that's just not the case. There's enough voices, enough people for enough issues that your talking point just becomes mute. I'm sorry.
Okay, do you think there's enough progressives in Canada to get you guys political power?
There's more progressives in terms of the voter base, in terms of what people actually believe, than there is anything else. It's a matter of getting them to realize that that's where they actually stand politically, and not even just politically, but how they view the world in general, right? Because most people try to base their political views, or at least progressives anyway, view their political views on basic human rights and basic human decency, right? So that's where, regardless of what the issues are, we're focusing on what's good for everyone, and not just whether it's corporations, whether it's this group of people or that group of people. We want to make things better for everyone.
But you can't make things better for everyone.
Why not?
In a country this big,
Why
you
not?
cannot make
Why not?
things better for everybody because
Why
somebody
not?
has to lose. You have to take some
Why?
from the middle class to give it to the bottom. Then
No,
the
you
middle
don't.
class get
No, you
hurt.
don't.
Yes, yes, you do. Yes, you do.
No, if you follow politics, the NDP right now are screaming to tax the rich more, tax the wealthiest ten
We don't.
percent more.
We don't have enough rich people in this
We
country.
do. They don't
No,
pay their
we
fair share of
don't.
taxes as it is
We
through
don't.
loopholes and everything
You're
else, man.
talking
Like,
about
don't
the
give me
upper
that
middle
crap.
class, sir. You're not talking about the billionaires. We don't have enough billionaires in this country like the United.
No, we do. And part of the problem is corporations seems to have more rights than people at this point. And the corporations are just run by the billionaires. So I'm sorry to say that we don't have enough billionaires. No, it's just because they're under a fucking corporate logo and not their actual name. Okay? Don't give me this shit. It's corporate fucking greed. Period. You don't like it? Get off the panel,
I,
because that's the reality.
I thought I'd interject here. I mean, I really like what your guest here has to say. I'm not saying I agree with it, but what I like hearing is the perspective and understanding that some people legitimately have that view, and it's a view that I often addressed in my teaching career because I taught economics.
Mhm.
And so what your guest is saying is he has a belief that an economy is a zero sum game, meaning there's a fixed amount of wealth. And if some people are going to have more, then it must be taken from someone else. But actually, with all due respect to your guest, that's actually not the case. And if you stop and think about it this way for a moment, I think think we could all see this. If you imagine life in Canada, at the time that it was being settled. Uh, Now think of the lifestyles that people had. And of course, there would be a great disparity between wealthy and poor people, and probably a greater disparity, in fact. But just think of an average lifestyle. Now think of the average lifestyle today. Just think of the things that we take for granted that they didn't have back then. Think of our GDP. And of course, our population is bigger, but even think of GDP per capita. It's much greater today. So with innovation, with invention, with mass production. And this was, of course, the main issue that Adam Smith studied. He literally asked this question: why are some countries wealthy and other countries are poor? And that's why he wrote the book, The Wealth of Nations. He was really trying to get at that issue. And he attributed a great deal of it to mass production, and to figuring out how to specialize in things, and just having one person, become an expert in this, and the other person builds on what they just did. He actually examined a pin factory, for example. I won't go into it, but it was incredible the numbers he came up with, where he said, if you were to work on making pins, and I literally mean like the straight pins that you'd stick in clothing, you know, you have to pull them out when you buy a new shirt from, whatever, from, oh, I won't advertise or promote a company, but you buy a new shirt, you pull out all these pins. So he examined that and he said, the most industrious guy could make maybe 20 pins in a day if he worked on his own. But if you get 10 guys and you have them work together and they all specialize, and this guy straightens the wire, this guy sharpens it, this guy fixes the head onto the pin, which he said was a very funny business. Then all of a sudden, these 10 guys are making thousands of pins, tens of thousands of pins a day. And if you divided all the pins amongst the 10 guys, each fellow in turn is responsible for thousands of pins instead of 20. So I'm just making the point that an economy is actually more organic. In other words, it can grow, as opposed to fixed.
What do you need it to? What do you need for the economy to grow?
Yeah. So in general,
it's called investment. It was a rhetorical question. It's called investment.
Okay, so I'm gonna take over on that one just for a second. So I'm gonna use the Alberta government as an example right now. Okay, so you say investment. I'm going to look at Alberta because it's a conservative run province right now. And I think it's a good example when it comes to the oil industry in Alberta, right? Because the oil industry, the different companies are supposed to do their own cleanup when it comes to the environment, when it comes to their drilling process, when it comes to all that sort of stuff, right? But they don't. And it's actually been shown and proven that the Alberta government flips the bill, billions of dollars, towards cleaning up after the oil companies when they shouldn't be the ones to do that. Right?
I love that you've interjected and completely pivoted to the oil companies. Again, my question was, how do we make the economy grow?
You make the companies pay for their own shit instead of having government give them subsidies and pay for their stuff.
What the hell?
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
How isn't it? Right? Because now the government isn't putting that money into cleaning up after those companies. They can actually put that into the people and not corporations.
Wait, sorry. Can I challenge that?
Poor people at the bottom. I'm talking about
the real conservative. Can I challenge that? Because, I mean, I understand that there was a lot of price gouging. There's a lot of oligopoly in the grocery sector in Canada, for example, Loblaw, Metro, and I think some other couple of guys. I think there were 6 Canadian companies in the grocery sector that amassed 60% of the market share.
I'm not talking about that.
I know you're not talking about that, but I'm just saying.
Reducing that corporate greed is not going to grow our economy.
Dude, what I'm trying to say.
Please take a basic economics class. Jesus, fuck.
I did take a basic.
We're not saying corporate greed is going to grow the economy. We're saying that's part of the problem.
I know corporate greed is a problem. However, if you have an oligopoly, corporate greed will be exploited more. I think we need more competition, and to do that, we need deregulation.
I agree.
Yeah, we need an actual capitalist
agreeing with both of you. I'm actually agreeing with both of you.
Not what I'm asking. Thank you very much for coming up and sharing your point of view, but that's not what I'm asking. Again, I'm asking, how do you grow the economy?
Make corporations pay their fair share.
I'm happy to address.
That's not how you grow the economy.
It is because the government wouldn't have to pay for themselves. Guys, stop for a second. Stop.
The host is talking.
Oh my God. What is this power trip that you guys have? Can you not relinquish?
Why are you struggling? Why don't you let the host and the guest speak, please?
Because you guys are interrupting me and coming up with
points. So the fact of the matter is, okay.
What I'm saying.
No, but it does. We're telling you the fact is the amount of government money that's going to corporations, if you make the corporations pay for their own shit, The government then can actually put that money into the people instead of
That's not what
corporations.
I'm asking, though. I'm asking, how do you grow the economy?
And I'm telling you how you grow the economy, because if you put more money into the people, then the people have more money to put into the economy, because we are a
There's
capitalist
no
economy. So it's based
there's no
on.
guarantee these people will spend that money.
You know
Are you
what? I
kidding
kind of
me
feel
right
like
now? People need the money to spend. We don't have the money to spend. We can't even buy groceries. So you
I
think if
kind of
we have the money, we're not going to spend
Speak
it? Come
for
on now.
yourself.
I kind
Speak
of
for
feel like
yourself.
there's no answer you're going to give the real
What?
conservative where he's going to allow the host to speak and this conversation to flow. Um,
Right,
I
right.
just
That's not a
I just don't
biased
know that he
response at
wants
all.
a conversation.
Yeah,
It's not
so we're
biased at
just going to
all.
move on from
Well,
this.
it's
I
not out of us. You
I mean, I would have loved to have just known what he was getting at. I guess he. I don't. I guess that guess
Maybe he
left.
can chime in the comment sections and come
Yeah,
back when he can articulate that in a
Mm.
way. But you have a really great guest here, and I'm worried that the conversation isn't flowing in the way you imagined it to flow.
I appreciate that. This is kind of what happened a couple weeks ago too. Kind of got off the rails with it.
Hmm.
Uh, so appreciate
The
that.
progressive. I have a question for you. When you said that when the corporations pay their fair share, what makes you think that they're not paying their fair share? And if so, what do you think ought to be done for them to pay
So
their fair share?
Well, prime example right now, again, and I'll use Alberta and I'll go back to how the government is flipping the bill for oil company cleanups, right? Like environmental cleanups, stuff like that, as well as on a federal level. I mean, we sit here and have debates, and I'm not saying you and me or whatever, just in a general sense, where we have debates as to, um, how we can make differences fiscally in government. And one of the things that I don't hear anyone actually talk about, and when I say that, I mean whether it's on a platform like this or the politicians in the actual, House of Commons on a federal level or provincially, talk about the fact that oil companies get massive subsidies still from the federal government. They're making record profits hand over fist, and they still get subsidies from the federal government on their taxes, on cleanup bills, on you name it. Hell, the carbon tax. Let's use that as an example, because I think a lot of people forget that the biggest polluters get a 10% cut to their carbon tax right off the fucking top, right?
Can
So
I
if you were to
chime in
get
on
rid of
that
that,
quickly?
yep,
In Alberta during COVID, it was really interesting. Like my husband worked as a well site geologist, just as some perspective of my opinion, in the oil and gas industry in Alberta. And one of the reasons why we walked away from the industry entirely and left the province is because we couldn't, like in good conscience, like the damage they were doing with the fracking and that it was too scary. But I'll get back to what I was saying about COVID. Well, everybody was locked in their houses. Oil and gas companies were frantically opening up other businesses under their oil and gas umbrella. So when I'm talking about other businesses, I'm talking about healthcare. I'm talking about just all different kinds of businesses, custodial care, under those oil and gas businesses. Those oil and gas businesses go to the government and they get a whole bunch of money. And it just drove me insane. A bunch of our money too went to TELUS, Shaw, all of these big corporations. Like we're handing out every time we turn around to big business tons and tons of money. Like when Bell calls me now and they want to throw a bill at me, I'm actually not a very nice person to that person on the other line. I tell them right away, it's not personal to you, but you guys actually owe me money. I'm a taxpayer.
yeah,
Hmm.
I got you by.
exactly. And just to add to that, as an art, I kind of want to hear what you have to say and chime in. But guys, I don't have the number, but I mean, if you can sit and think of all the different instances over even the last 20 years, you've heard on the news somewhere that some sort of big company, whether it's an airline or, you know, um, automotive industry, or I've heard once an oil company got government bailouts because they were doing horribly, which to me, sorry, but when it comes to corporations, when a government gives a bailout, that completely like makes it so the capitalist system is no longer a capitalist system because you're not allowing the business to sort itself out like it's supposed to under a proper capitalist system.
Exactly.
I
Well said.
wholeheartedly agree with you.
Well
I
said.
don't, I don't like bailouts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Hey, while the guest that I don't know whether you removed him or whether he left, but while he was talking, I was I was hoping I could address his assertion that there just isn't enough wealth in Canada. There's not enough billionaires. We can't tax them all. So a book that I would highly recommend um, reading is The Trouble with Billionaires. And one of the authors is Linda McQuaig, I believe, and the other author is Neil Brooks. And that's a Canadian book. They studied the Canadian economy. That was the focus of the book. It was Canada. And it's amazing. It's amazing how they took a long time to research and write this book, but the figures that they got at and the timeline that they present, look at how things were so great in the 50s, the 60s. A single income could support a family. You'd have a house. You weren't in debt for 40 years, to pay off that house. You lived well. You had a pension. In the 50s and the 60s, we built our post-secondary educational system. We built it.
absolutely.
And people could go and not, they didn't have to go into debt for the rest of their lives or for decades for that university education. People could afford a university education. And at the same time, our economy built those universities. Now look at it now. The universities are built. They're finding it difficult to stay solvent. And who can afford to go to university? I I was recently, my daughter's in university now. And I said, well, how many of your, where'd your friend, Sally, I'll just make up names, Sally or whoever, where did they go? Well, they didn't go. They knew they couldn't afford it. And the real tragedy of that is they felt that way. Those friends of hers, they felt that way all through high school. And so what's going on in their mind when they're sitting in science class, physics, whatever, English, they're sitting there thinking, well, I'm not going to university anyways. Why do I need to pay attention to this? They're already limiting their options in their mind because university just isn't an option for them. So, I mean, that's part of our reality now. So, yeah, the bottom line, though, the trouble with billionaires, the argument that it makes is tax the rich. Just
Do it.
wow. I had no idea until I started reading this book. The marginal tax rates we used to have, holy
Yep.
cow, man. It was crazy. Like 80% marginal, like
Yeah.
upper marginal tax rates.
And that's very good. I'm glad you brought that up because that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize is it used to be, you're right, upwards to 80% tax rates. And so when you say that, it makes me think because there's that talking point of, well, if you raise corporate taxes, they'll go somewhere else. No, they paid it before. They paid worse before,
Oh yeah.
and they didn't go anywhere,
And
right? So
look what was happening to our economy. Look what was happening to standard of
it
living.
was booming.
Booming.
Yeah,
It's a
because
very
they were paying their fair share.
this is the point I wanted to make to your guest there. And that is there is plenty of wealth. There is plenty of wealth, and it's about the marginal tax rates. It's about capital gains taxes, and it's about corporate tax rates. And we used to have a really a great functioning system in the 50s and the 60s. And that's basically what that book, The Trouble with Billionaires, looked at as well. Why were things so great back then? It's simple enough. Anyone could look
Yep.
up those numbers, those facts, those figures, but they've done that and they've put it into a single book that a person can just get them all right there.
Yep.
So yeah, no, that wealth is there. The wealth is
And
there, and it's doing jack all for a Canadian society, just sitting in the bank accounts and the investment accounts and so on. To the point your previous guest was making, it's at work. Money is always at work. I won't get in.
that's
I won't
ours.
get into the theories of why would his name escape me when it never has before. But there was a very profound economist who made the point that in the Great Depression, people started to hoard money, like literally hide it. So,
Absolutely.
notwithstanding that issue, if people aren't literally sticking money under a mattress, then money is always at work. But if we allow it to become concentrated in the hands of the wealthy, it is working for them. It is not working for society in general. And it is not, to your guest's point, it is not contributing to GDP, at least not nearly as effectively as just putting it in the hands of less
The,
wealthy people,
the working
the
class. Yeah.
working class, because they have a very high, too high, they have a high marginal propensity to consume, which means they will spend all the money they get. Basically,
Absolutely.
Canadians on average spend like 100 and some percent of all the money that they earn. So that ratio changes year to year, but it's around like 110, 112%. So for every dollar they earn, they spend like $1.12 or something, and they go
Art,
into debt.
art,
They
art,
just
but
go into debt.
Art, I'm going to contend that point. There's actually an economic or economist. I'm sure you're a professor of economic, or
A
you
teacher,
profess
yeah.
economics, right? So I'm sure you know who Art Laffer is, right?
The Laffer curve,
The
yeah.
Laffer curve. He's famous for the Laffer curve. So
Yeah.
just a TLDR for the Laffer curve is that it's very theoretical, right? But Laffer suggests that there's a specific tax rate that'll allow the government to rake in as much revenue as possible. We don't know what that tax rate is, but it's somewhere between 0 and 100%. Now, we moved in, the government tries to amend the tax rate to find this optimal tax rate. And we actually saw it in the US with Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where the government slashed the corporate tax rate from, I think, was it 30 something percent to 21%, right? Anyway, he slashed it by a lot. And in the first year, you actually saw the corporate tax revenue garnered from that tax cut diminish. However, in the following year, it rebounded back, and it rebounded back because it increased the cost of equity, and a lot of the businesses wanted to start more, right? So it's kind of the anti-progressive mindset. Just because you increase tax revenue, that doesn't mean the government's going to rake in more revenue. It could actually have the adverse effect, which is lesser government revenue. To be honest, in Canada, I think the tax rates are too high, even for corporations as well as income. And we also need to slash the red tape to incentivize more businesses to start. I'm not a fan of those subsidies that you mentioned, the progressive moves. Like I don't think certain businesses should should receive favorable treatment. Otherwise, it creates oligopolies, which I'm not in favor of.
Well, and this is so just to kind of toss something in there. The biggest issue I find at this point is not necessarily that taxes are too high for, say, corporations or anything to that sense. I think it's more so at this point because we know, again, I'll go back to we're not actually we, we're calling it a capitalist system at this point, but it's not, right? Because the system that we have is full of monopolies, right? And we see it in every sector, whether it's oil, whether it's the uh,
Grocery stores, yeah.
yeah, grocery stores, telecommunications, right? So your Bell, your Rogers,
Thank you.
um,
Oil and gas.
oil and gas. We're seeing it all over, right? So that's where I think the biggest issue lies right now, is because as much as we sit here and say that, Canada is a capitalist nation, like what we're seeing is what I consider late stage capitalism, where it's monopolies disguising itself as a proper um, capitalist system.
Yeah,
And
but
once you
inherently,
can
that's
break up those monopolies, then you actually, the innovation comes back, because now you actually have to compete with innovation, as opposed to like we have now with the monopolies, where they just buy out every other smaller company and create their own network of companies that they profit from.
but your last point is really uh, underscores the optic of a capitalist society. As a capitalist society, you start a business, you want to grow to be big and whatnot, and smaller businesses are eaten up by bigger businesses. So in a capitalist society, who wins? Well, it's going to be the monopoly businesses that have got the
Mhm.
firepower, and unfortunately, in a capitalist society, and this is where the Competition Act comes into play. In a capitalist society, you're always competing against the bigger fish. It's the same size ocean, and there's new fish born every day, but you're always competing against the bigger fish. And I'm speaking from the standpoint of a former business owner that
Yep.
would bid on government tenders and
Hmm.
did what I had to do. You're always competing against the bigger fish, but the bigger fish also attract the talent in order for those bigger fish to survive, and that's one of the challenges smaller businesses have, is that they can't necessarily financially attract the the people that are going to make their organizations into the bigger fish. You also have venture capitalism that
Yep.
injects money into these smaller businesses to make them big. So you can't necessarily blame the model for what it is. Where you can lay blame is whenever you're listening to the to the radio and you hear of a grocery chain or a bank or a cell phone provider that announces their quarterly profits in the billions of dollars, and you're wondering why your
Yep.
cell phone bill is $130 a month. Like, that becomes offensive to Canadian consumers, absolutely. But the
Yeah.
nature of capitalism is just that. It's to be big. It's to be the paramount of your industry, and we don't necessarily have the guardrails and safeguards in Canada to stop it.
Well, and we
So
do,
where,
though,
where
and
what do you do?
that's where, like you said, there's the Consumers Act. There's other things that they can actually do, and we've seen more of a pushback, I think, in the United States, more so than Canada right now. Um, and when I say that, I mean like minuscule, right? Because um, I apologize. The position of the person within the American government I can't think of right now, but they have actually challenged mergers, like big corporate mergers, to say like,
It,
no,
it
you guys
happens here in
can't.
Canada too. It happens here in
Yeah,
Canada too. But
but
the
this
government
is
doesn't
because,
have that reach into the checkout aisle. They don't have the reach into the pricing that some of these larger monopolist companies hold.
yeah.
The government has no mechanism to price fix, we'll call it. And even if they did, that would significantly skew businesses away from entering into
Well,
that
but
model
but I'm not
because they're
talking
they're
about price
stymied of
fixing
their
though, right?
profits.
But I'm not
No,
talking
absolutely.
talking
But the
about
sense of
price fixing.
capitalism
But
as a whole, it's a detriment to the the common person within Canada, because you've got these companies that have got responsibilities to shareholders, and that's the biggest challenge. Is when they maximize profits, they maximize the dividend to their shareholders, which allows and puts their company in a position that allows them to to be on the stock market, showing that they're growing, showing that they're doing well, to have other shareholders invest, whether that be individual shareholders or mutual funds. It drives money into the company, which is the ultimate goal.
Yeah,
These
well,
larger
but part of the
corporations
problem
have got
is
a
too, though.
responsibility to shareholders, not to the consumer.
But and this is where part
100.
of the problem lies too, though, right? Because Happy, I do see your comment there, buddy. They could pursue antitrust breaches, which is what I was trying to get out earlier, which I couldn't quite vocalize. So I appreciate that, Happy. Um, actually, Grandma Sandy, you've been sitting so quietly there. Do you have anything to input? You've been sitting there the entire live and haven't said a word.
Grandma, let's hear it. What do you have to say?
Maybe she's not even
Yeah, she might have
there
stepped
at this
away. She
point.
might have stepped
Yeah.
away.
Okay.
Put her to
Uh,
sleep.
Hey, I thought I'd chime in and address the nuance that Ray, forgive me, I can't see
yep.
everybody's full names. And when I go to press on it, I get some totally different thing. So, but Ray, you mentioned the Laffer curve. And in so doing, he introduces a very good point. And that is when Linda McQuaig and Neil Brooks were analyzing the data from, in the 1950s and the 1960s and so on in Canada, and talking about how great things were back then when we just had a much higher upper marginal tax rate. Well, to Ray's point, and he might not have necessarily been thinking about this, but this is kind of the point he's making. That was in the 50s and the 60s. You could do things with taxation rates in the 50s and the 60s that you kind of can't do now because of globalization, right? So you push tax rates too high, especially for corporations, and they'll be like, "Oh, okay, fine, I'll go somewhere else," right? And they were kind of they hadn't really thought of that as much in the 50s and the 60s. They just think, "Wow, man, I guess tax rates have gone up. I guess I have to pay it." But yeah, different world now. So to your point, yeah, the that optimal tax rate um, uh, invariably is much lower now for corporations and for individuals as well, especially wealthy individuals, especially really wealthy individuals, than it was back then.
Hey,
Um,
Art, you sound like you've got a significant background in these kind of topics. What is your background? Because I like what you're saying. I'd love to learn more.
Oh yeah, hey. Well, it's just what I'm speaking from when I touch on economics is just my teaching career. So I taught economics for 30 years, um, and
Very
uh,
cool. Very
and
cool.
I taught at the high school level, but I taught AP economics, which is kind of first year university.
Yep.
And so for those older students, equity. Um, they were front and center for a lot of them, so we discussed and debated this a lot in my classes. So yeah,
So,
good fun.
what would you say to the notion that um, even going back as little as 10 years, I mean, the
Mm.
global economy has been upon us for longer than that,
Oh, much
but
longer. Yeah.
yeah, certainly. But through the power of the internet and how fast everything has scaled up, and then of course the advent of cryptocurrency, which has certainly made a dent in the global economy in the sense of trading leverage. What would you say to the notion that should we have not had this influx of the information age? And I'm dating myself. I say 10 years, and 2014 wasn't that long ago. And good night, 2014. Well, I had my first child in 2014. So even if we go back further, let's say 15 years. Where do you find the tipping point for how we could have maybe insulated ourselves on an economic scale here in Canada versus having to deal with a global economy?
Well, the first thing I would throw out there is um, trade is good. Trade is good. Where we get into difficulty is the ability for corporations to just move around at whim to wherever they can get a better deal. So the idea behind, trade, again, to the point of your earlier guest who left, trade is another very powerful way to increase gross domestic product. Now, GDP is not the only economic indicator, but I always referred to it as the mother of all economic
Yeah, it's a very
indicators.
strong economic indicator,
Yeah.
right?
And and so if you look at the formula for GDP, at least it's called the aggregate expenditure formula. It's a pretty simple formula. The way to remember it is, can I get extra mayo? And the extra mayo is exports minus imports. So how much we're exporting versus how much we're importing is a big chunk of our GDP. And that that can that is another great example, like a perfect example of the organic nature of economies. It's not a zero sum game where, well, if one country gets more, another country's got to get less. And I used to model this all the time for my students. um, so the idea is, if you can allow each country to focus on what it's best at, then the total amount of product for both countries, let's say you've got two countries trading with each other, it's far more complicated than that, obviously, because you've got, hundreds of countries or dozens of countries all trading with each other. But if you can allow them to all focus on their strengths, what's called their comparative advantages, then their economies can all grow. It's not like one grows and then the other therefore necessarily must shrink. It's not like that. But where we get into the
I
problem,
love the language. I love the language. Do you somebody that I follow quite extensively is Ian Lee. He's an economist at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. I live in Ottawa, and I think you know who he is. Do you know who he is?
I don't, but I'll start
Okay.
following him.
Absolutely, yeah. He's Ian Lee. Yeah, he's a teacher, professor, associate professor at the Sprott School of Business here at Carleton University. And I listen to a lot of his language, and I listen to a lot of your language. They're very parallel. They're very similar, and I love listening to economists on how our economy works. And I say that for two reasons. Number one, the language is very clear. It's not. There's somebody somewhere thinks that economists speak in terms that are not generally understood, but the language is very clear. We have inputs, we have outputs. Our economy is based on that. And number two, the goal of making it clear to Joe Blow Canadian is paramount with economists, because I find that they want everybody to understand why the economy works the way that it does. You're a teacher, and so is Ian Lee. So I really appreciate what you're saying, how you're saying it, why you're saying it. It's just very nice to hear.
Oh, thank you. That's the nicest thing I've heard all day. Yeah. So the thing that I want to point out is, just so we can differentiate between trade and kind of corporate control, is you're always going to be better off. I used to, for whatever reason, I'd always focus on bananas because everyone can relate to bananas. So you're much better off growing bananas in Central America, where they basically grow like weeds, right? So that's a strength for those countries. Try to grow a banana in Canada. Well, it can be done. It can be done. It would be ridiculously expensive because you'd have to grow them in greenhouses that you heat, probably, most of the year. And it would take a great deal of resources, fertilizer, and so on. Um, so it could be done, but it would be just ridiculous to do it. So we're always going to grow bananas in Central America. But the problem is, who owns the bananas, right? Um, when Ricardo, wrote his theories on the advantage of trade, you if a country grew bananas, well, probably the companies that exported those bananas were, they resided in that country. You see, so trade was between companies that made products that their nations were good at making. But that is not the case today. Some American company, for example, which is often the case, but more and more Chinese companies becoming very active in Africa, for example. They'll go and buy up the land, labor, and capital in other countries, and now you've got, say, an American company that's, for all intents and purposes, growing the bananas in Central America and selling those throughout the world. And then,
I'm going to give you an example of a Canadian company that does that in Colombia, and it's
yeah,
not bananas; it's fireworks.
oh
There
my,
is a company. There is a company in Canada,
hmm,
and it resides in Abbotsford, BC, and Trenton, Ontario. And the company is Mystical Distributing.
yeah,
My stepdad for 20 years worked for that company as
mhm,
their somebody that worked for the company. I'm not going to try and out myself too much, but in Colombia, one of the owners of Mystical, built a village essentially, and part of the manufacturing of the fireworks is within that village. He also owns the manufacturing in China. He also owns the shipping from China. So in China, it's called Big Dog Fireworks,
mhm,
and he owns the shipping, or at least has a stake in the shipping from China to Canada. And it's a Canadian company. So while the fireworks themselves and the products thereof are maybe manufactured within that country, and the manufacturing has to pay their taxes and due diligence to that company. At the end of the day, the profit margin lies in Canada, and
yeah,
that's the end game, right?
yeah,
If you can have your products manufactured in a country that has less than strict labor laws, you open a profit margin. So, to your
yeah.
point of the bananas, it used to be that that country used to own or at least the small business used to own, so there would be more going to it. But through loopholes in tax systems, countries have gotten wise to it, and Canada is not the only one. We're able to have our products manufactured offshore, and a great example would be Apple. It costs about
Yeah,
$10 to snap together an iPhone in China,
yeah,
and they're selling them for $1,500 here in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating.
yeah. No, absolutely. And then the third issue, and you were alluding to it, or more than alluding, I think you out and out stated it, but it's just, you've got this tripartite kind of reality now where you've got a country that is good at doing something like growing bananas. Then you've got a company that could be anywhere in the world that owns those bananas now. It doesn't necessarily have to be a company that's from the country that grows the bananas. And then that company can officially reside anywhere. And if they can move to Ireland to get a lower tax rate, then they'll do it. It's easy. It's easy. They're not literally moving a factory or a plantation. They just have to just set up an office and a post a post
Well, yeah,
office
absolutely. If it's
box.
got a tax advantage to them,
Yeah,
I mean, your head office could be in Switzerland.
yeah,
Yeah.
And we all know the way that money moves in Switzerland, and the tax rates.
Yep.
If we look at the optics and goals of our neighbor to the south. He's got this buy America first sort of economic insulation of the country, putting tariffs on Canada and Mexico, which I know it's just kind of a first salvo of economic sanctions that he wants to levy against those two countries, considering the amount of raw materials that and food that comes
Yeah.
from both countries, notwithstanding.
Well, and we have to make sure. Sorry, just to put that in
Yeah,
there,
go ahead.
put in there quick that for context too. Like Donald Trump is saying and doing all this stuff as a politician, but I mean, as a businessman, all his stuff that he's been hucking while he's been on the campaign has all been made in China, right? Which goes against
Right?
what
Look
he,
at his Bibles. They're made for a couple of bucks in China, and he's selling them
yeah,
for $59.99 on the market, right? But
yeah,
notwithstanding, the fact is that you can't insulate yourself in a global economy anymore. It's just not possible. People are smart. A person is smart. People are stupid, but a person is smart. And the heads of these big companies are going to find loopholes. As I stated earlier, the responsibility to all of these publicly traded companies is not the company itself, it's to the shareholders. Once you put yourself in the public market and you have investors, your responsibility is to those investors, because they want you to make money, because they are banking on you making money so they can make money. So it is 100% in the best interest of that company to diversify and move themselves within the global market and the global economy to maximize profit for the benefit of the shareholders. Now, if you're a small mom and pop shop, okay, that's one thing. You might have a voice to, rise up and shake your fist, and that's what the CFI, or Canadian Federation of Independent Business Owners, CFIB, is for, so that they have a voice within government. But otherwise, if you're a publicly traded company, you're going to do what you got to do to make sure that your profits are maximized. And unfortunately for the general consumer, over 90% of what we consume are from these publicly traded companies. We've got these buy local campaigns that happen within every city in Canada. But at the end of the day, our household incomes don't necessarily allow for us to go down to the farmer's market and spend a bit more for produce than we could get at Walmart.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Although I must
Art,
say, some of my local farmers who I really enjoy supporting, they give you a pretty good deal. They give you a pretty good deal.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely, absolutely,
um,
and they've got farmer stands, and you can go and
yeah,
get your fresh produce, and a lot of people do it on principle, which is great, and we need more of that.
yeah, no,
um,
absolutely. Hey,
Art, I
yeah, go ahead,
no,
Bruce.
I just wanted to since we're kind of been on the topic on trade and all that sort of stuff. Um, Given your knowledge, and I definitely don't know as much as you, but I know it definitely plays a factor, and I think you could probably clarify a lot better for people and articulate it better. Can you explain how climate change plays a role in kind of global trade and what we see in aspects with um, like the global economy that goes along with it, because we need to realize with the climate change, like certain countries have had to shift their agricultural habits and start growing different things. And can you kind of dive more into how climate change affects like the global market and trade and all that comes along with it?
Yeah, well, I'll do my best. I'll do what I can. Um, so the there's a couple of issues. Uh, One is food production, and we're already noticing that. Um, so Central America and Africa, they've been hit the worst. So from a local standpoint, they're really suffering now. In a few years, we'll really start to notice it. So you'll notice it at the grocery store. And the irony that drives me crazy, again, why I could no longer support the Conservative Party, is if we see higher prices in the grocery store, they go, "Oh, it's the tax. It's the tax. It's the carbon tax." Well, a lot of the carbon tax does not apply to Canadian agriculture. So I'm not saying it doesn't apply at all, but to a lot of the areas, it just doesn't apply. Like for fuel used to dry grain, fuel used to, for literally for the farm vehicles and the harvesting and so on, that's exempt, right? So nonetheless, I I might agree with the idea of making the Canadian agriculture sector completely exempt from carbon tax, but it's largely already exempt. So just that kind of misinformation that, on the one hand, it's global warming that's causing a certain amount of the increase we see in food prices. Now, most of it is price gouging. And again, the thing that brought me into becoming active on that was just the accusation. Oh, it's the carbon tax. It's not the carbon tax. It's mostly price gouging, but we're also experiencing the effects of climate change already, and it's going to get much worse, sadly. There's no mechanism, unfortunately, for the climate to get better. Not in our lifetimes, not in our children's lifetimes, not in our grandchildren's lifetimes. It will never be better. We've already committed, for example, with just the CO2 that's in the atmosphere now. It takes a long time for our climate system to come into equilibrium. But we can, I shouldn't say we, I should say climate scientists can crunch the numbers. They know the radiative forcing of CO2. They know the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. They plug in these numbers, and figuring out the Stefan Boltzmann, equilibrium, and they go, oh, okay, we're already committed to basically another degree of warming already. So even if we just cut everything off today, just the physics of it is going to take a while to play out, but probably over that, even if we stopped putting any hydrocarbons, burning hydrocarbons and putting them into the atmosphere, we've already raised the average global temperature of the planet about 1.2 degrees. I know last year, it's an all-time record again. The average for that year was 1.5 degrees. Basically, it's like 1.49. But we have to average that out for at least a decade, and to be more accurate, it'd be like 30 years before you can officially say, oh, well, now we've increased the average global temperature, to 1.5. Another thing that I would point out, though, is we never go back. Like once you hit a temperature, it's not like, oh, maybe we'll start to fall from there. You'll fall for a couple of years, but last year's heat record is tomorrow's like coldest possible year you could have. Today's heat record is tomorrow's good old days. It won't go back. It can't. There's no mechanism in the climate for that to happen. So what we're seeing, like in answer to your question, what we're seeing with the food market, it's just going to get worse. So that's one of the first places you're going to see it. Another thing, sadly, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but sea level rise will crush economies all over the world. And that means, what happens in Singapore, what happens in China, what happens in Vietnam, it's essentially happening everywhere, because if they get hurt, we get hurt. But hey man, the ocean goes all over the world. Every place is going to experience sea level rise. And people tend to downplay like, 3 millimeters a year, who cares? But it's not the average, because that's what you're whenever you're looking at averages, when you talk about sea level rise, it's 3 millimeters. But averages don't occur at average rates. Newmarket gets about a millimeter a day or whatever it was. I looked it up at one point when I was making a video of rainfall. That of course, does not mean we get 1 millimeter of rain every day. comes in fits and starts and so on. And what you have to worry about with sea level rise is storm surges. You know, when there's a storm, you take all that 3 millimeters that's spread out over a huge ocean, like,
Yeah.
you know, unfathomably huge, and now you push it towards some land somewhere, and it's going to destroy everything. And at a point in time, very soon, in fact, it's already happening, like try to get insurance on a property in Florida. um, you're going to see the most expensive properties on the planet become worthless. They're going to be written down and written off very quickly, because it's not a matter of like literally when they're underwater. Nobody who cares about that, you know, because that's what the deniers always talk about. Oh, this was supposed to be underwater by now, or you know, they're talking about when things are going to be underwater. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter when it's underwater. What matters is when it becomes financially worthless. And what that takes is just storm surge after storm surge after storm surge. And then after a while, people go, you know, basically the insurance companies will probably be the first domino. They'll just say, you know what? We're not insuring this. We're not insuring it. And at that point, it becomes worthless. If you can't insure a property, you can't
What's the
operate a
point?
business there.
Yeah.
So that financially, you're going to start seeing, you know, at some point, we don't really know when. I'm not going to say it's 10 years or 20 years, but probably by the end of the century, um, the most expensive properties on the planet will be worthless.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so
And
that's
if we
going to be
circle
the
back to
biggest
food
economic.
insecurity that we have here in Canada, you know, with global warming being what it is, and the polar ice caps melting, which is contributing to the rise in sea levels, that would mean inherently that our climate is becoming, here in Canada, it's becoming more temperate, where we might have a longer growing season. You know, our chief exports are wheat, soybean, corn, poultry, beef, etc. Not poultry, but pork and beef, etc. So from a Canadian perspective, we don't necessarily have the climate of Venezuela, but if global warming is, to your argument, a detriment to some of these hotter countries, you know, those along the equator, would it be a benefit to Canada where maybe we could open up some of the land that is inhabited, underdeveloped? The growing seasons could be longer, and we could maybe yield more from our crops?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's going to be, in some respects, some winners and some losers from climate change, uh, but not in a net effect. I mean, very local industries and so on. And to your point, um, I've literally met folks at my local farmers market who were very excited to have bought land in northern Ontario, and they're being very deliberate and strategic in their planning and saying, "Hey, it's not the best land right now, but it will be." And
So
so
does that inherently, theoretically, contribute to you know, a climate shift in where we're able to grow crops and
it
harvest
it,
some of
it does.
the natural resources that we haven't been able to harvest in the past? So I guess I mean I listen to you. Your points are fantastic. The way you're speaking is awesome, and it's very intellectual. But we have parts of our planet that we haven't been able to harvest or use, and there's a bulk majority of Canada that is just generally inhabitable for reasons of you know, access,
Hmm.
services, you know, natural gas or what have you, but they're resource rich areas of the country. So could climate change, theoretically, on its face, could climate change be of a net benefit to Canada, because it could allow us as a country, and I mean, notwithstanding the detriment that it would be for the rest of the world, I'm not minimizing that at all.
yeah, yeah.
But could it be a net benefit to us where, yeah, okay, we're getting warmer by 1.2, 1.3 degrees. So in the future, 10, 15, 20 years from now, there might be areas of Canada that we may be able to use more than we can now because the earth, and I mean this goes for any country that is above the 45th or 50th parallel, and same thing with our southern neighbors. Could this be like you said? There's going to be winners and losers. Well, we've got areas of the planet that we haven't been able to get to too much. Could this be a net benefit?
Yeah. Well,
Art,
yeah, go ahead, Moose.
sorry, just before you have your rebuttal on that, so to your point on the Northern Ontario, so I live in Northern Ontario,
Nice.
and that's where it makes me think like we have a rising Mennonite population up here in Northern Ontario because in Southern Ontario, all the farmland is already bought up, owned, and a lot of the Mennonite communities have split their land to the point where they can't split it anymore. So they have started to buy land up here in certain spots, more closer to, I'd say, Sault Ste. Marie. But I'm about an hour west of Sudbury, so on the way to Sault Ste. Marie. And in the back area,
So like Elliott Lake,
as
that
we
kind of
call it,
area.
pardon me?
You're like Elliott Lake, that kind of area. I used to live in Sudbury, so.
Yeah, around that area. Yeah, exactly. Um, so a lot of the back area you don't see on the highway, there is Mennonite farms set up. Part of the problem is there's only so much land, especially up here in Northern Ontario, and I think it's a good example of kind of across Canada where if it's already good or if there's changes to an area like I look at the prairie provinces where you know all the land is optimally used at this point, right? And we see that in southern Ontario where it's farmland, and we see it in Alberta in different retrospects, whether you're talking about food, whether you're talking about resources. Um, and I think the biggest thing is the terrain because getting back to the northern Ontario,
Yep.
like there's only certain areas that you can actually farm a full crop without having issues because up here, like the land is just it's rock bed, it's slate, it's
Yeah,
you
Yeah.
know,
no, absolutely. And from a
Exactly.
Southern Ontario perspective, I used to work. I was a fleet manager for an agricultural company here in Southern Ontario,
yep,
and I can't be like it really opened my eyes to the amount of productive chemicals, we'll say, that farmers use to maximize the yields of their crops. You'd have sprayers going around and spraying the soybean fields and the corn fields and whatnot, and it's their herbicides or pesticides, but there are also chemicals in there to maximize the yield of the crops. In other areas of Canada where we don't necessarily have that nutrient rich soil, I'll tell you from experience that those nutrients are introduced into the soil through fertilizers that are brought over from Ukraine, that are brought over from other areas of the world through big ships or what have you. And when you put K-mag and potassium and nitrogen in the soil to enrich the soil, whenever that level of crop cultivation enters into northern Canada, I think you're going to see a significantly larger yield of crops. The problem is that we don't have the climate up there. Did you know that the seed that enters into the soil in the most southern tip of Ontario is different than the seed that enters the soil in, let's say, Renfrew, Ontario,
yep.
because the
They're genetically modified. Yeah, my
they
uncle
are,
works
but
for
they're
Cambrian
modified
College.
to the correct, and they're
Yep,
modified to the temperature that they're going to be entered into.
yep.
Now, GMO crops, there's a lot of controversy around it, I'm sure, but it doesn't detract from the net benefit of knowing what the temperature and the climate is in Windsor, Ontario versus Renfrew, Ontario.
Yep.
There's a significant amount of climate difference between those two cities. So yeah, we can stand all day and say that there's something wrong with GMO crops, but at the end of the day, it's science.
And it helps, if
Yeah.
the conditions do get unhospitable, for lack of better words, then you can adjust to be able to keep
Absolutely,
growing those same
absolutely,
things.
and a lot of these seeds are resistant to certain pesticides and herbicides. Roundup is one of them. There's a term that's used in the industry called it burning down a field, which is
Yep.
basically spraying Roundup on the field to kill off any weeds or what have you. And those seeds are made to be Roundup resistant, and that's the whole point, so that they can be planted. They can have a good chance of yield, and they don't have these parasitic crops growing that could hurt the farmer's field. Now, naturally, there's a financial aspect to it. Not talking about that. The fact is that if global warming is a thing, then we could see certain parts of our country opened up to better yielding of crops.
Yeah, a point that I just want to make to that, like theoretically, or well, beyond theoretically, that's true, but to Moose's point, that takes geological time scales for that to occur. For the land in northern Ontario to all of a sudden be like, it's warm now, so let's start
Oh
growing
yeah, it's not
crops.
an overnight thing, but
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
just and just
like a generation or two.
no,
well,
no,
just
it's
just the ground itself too,
geological
though, right? Is the issue.
geological time scales.
Yeah,
We're looking at beyond even thousands of years. So sorry to say,
yeah,
it's
because if it's not, but the
yeah,
vast majority up here in northern Ontario, like if it's not rock bed or slate, and which is most of it, or sorry, quartz as well, it's clay,
yeah,
right? It's
yeah,
it's you can genetically modify the crops to do better, but when it comes to having a clay base like we have up here, it's not like a lot of farmers will do 2 or 3 seasons of corn, and then they can't grow anything in that field for a couple of years because of what the crop does to it, and tilling it just turns the clay into the fertile soil. Um, so it just
Absolutely,
creates more
crops
issues.
down here in southern Ontario, they rotate between
yeah,
corn, wheat, soy, and then they're going to give the field a year,
yeah,
generally.
yeah. It's a
Yeah,
good.
but you can't do that up here because the amount of clay and other things that just make the soil too harsh. Like the only thing that really does good up here is hay.
Mm,
That's really the only thing that does like a good yield up here is clay, or sorry, hay at this point. Like I said, corn, you get the odd crop that does good, but essentially just stuff for live crop.
yeah.
Uh,
No, fair enough. Host, I'm going to drop down. Work
yep.
day tomorrow, so just wanted to say thanks for having me up. And Art, great talking to you, man. Like,
Nice talking to you.
yeah. Follow me, I'll follow you back,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
But even outside of the whole TikTok, I certainly tend to encourage people to reach out and vice versa, just to have conversation, whether it's to share a view or whatever the case may be. I love having these kind of discussions, and progressive. We're all kind of cloaked by our handles, but eventually, I'd love to get to know you as people. So thanks again.
Hey, you know what?
Yeah.
I'd
Thanks for
love
coming up.
I'd love to know, how do you even I sound like an idiot here on TikTok. If I press on anti whatever his name is, so I can only
Anti-social
see
media.
oh, cool. That's a great I love it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so if I click on your thing, instead of like seeing who you are or your account, I get all this, like I get this gift gallery. So how can I see anti and follow you? That's what I want to know. How do I do that?
I think there should be like a little plus next to my name, and
Yes.
that might. So once you do that, and then just search me, and then send me a message. I have a real name and a social
Oh,
insurance number. I'm not going to
yeah.
give that part to you, but I do
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
real name. And for
Yeah.
context, I'm a tradesman in Canada. I'm a truck and coach technician in Ontario, so I work on big trucks. But I'm also a student of law at Queen's University, and
My alma mater.
pardon me.
It's my alma mater. I went there for
Nice, nice. Yeah, I'm
four
doing my certificate
years.
in law. It's nothing to brag about, because it's an online certificate, but notwithstanding, it gives me a good foundation of Canadian law.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm looking at avenues of maybe a bachelor of political science online.
Nice.
I still have a couple of kids that I got to take care of, so
Yeah, yeah.
I still got to make money. But notwithstanding, um, I'm an intellectual, and I like talking to people that are of the similar mindset.
Well, and antisocial. I'm just going to suggest. I've already followed you. I figured it was that plus sign. It's all about the plus sign. Um,
Of course.
a film that I recently posted, I'll just draw your attention to, is Do Oil Executives Love Their Children? And it speaks to a lot of the points you were raising about how essentially corporations are handcuffed in terms of what they can do for the betterment of society. And my context was, of course, climate change, and just raising addressing the issue, like where people will naturally think, well, come on, climate change can't be that serious. If it was, these corporations would just stop doing what they're doing because they don't want to kill the planet. They don't want to set their own children up for a life of hardship. But they're, to the point that you were raising earlier, they're handcuffed. There's no mechanism in the corporate structure to allow for a corporation to do anything other than pursue maximum profits. That's all they can do. And, if, a couple of sub points here, if they do anything less than anything that they can imagine, then they'll be fired. And that goes all the way to the CEO. And the second thing is, what they can imagine is pretty damn dark. like it's
Oh,
pretty
absolutely.
it's pretty crazy, the things that they will do. Don't think for a moment that they won't break the law. They they'll do anything. Uh,
Anyway,
and yeah,
I'm going to wrap it up. Progressive, I see that Carrie may or may not be in the comments. If she's requesting, bring her up. Carrie is she's a pretty good panelist. So
Okay.
that said, thanks everybody for the chat tonight. I'm going to crawl into bed with my beautiful wife, and we will talk to y'all down the line.
thanks so much for your participation. Loved it.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. Art, thank you so much for getting involved in the conversation like that. I was
Oh,
honestly thinking of more just a more interview kind of, pick away at your brain, but I think it's kind of great we're able to have these conversations. Um, so yeah, I appreciate that. How you doing on time? You still got time? Are you in a hurry?
well, in truth, I will have to take my leave soon.
Okay.
Um, but I could take one more question or pursue one more train of thought if somebody had something that they were itching to talk about or ask about. Maybe I'll take one more pursue one more discussion.
There you go. Okay, so if anyone has anything, Grandma Sandy, you're still up. I don't know if you're actually there. Frontline Feminist, you just came up.
I just wanted to say good job, Art.
Oh, you're very kind. You always are.
Yeah, I've been battling climate change deniers all day today, so thank you.
Mm. It's it's nasty business. It can be frustrating, but a point that I remember making to you one time, I forget whether it was in within comments or frontline feminists and I will discuss things through messages and so on. Just a great person. Love everything she's doing. Um, and I just made the point that sometimes when I'm dealing with climate deniers, I'll start out writing a comment in response to something they say, and I'll go, you freaking idiot, what do you. But then I go back, I discuss some technical aspect of the climate or politics or whatever it might be, and then I go back. This is what I often do. I go back and then I start over at the top, and I inject, thank you for your thoughtful comment. and then I changed my tone from there on, because we're not going to change anyone's minds unless we can change their hearts first. And we
You
can't
honestly
change.
think that's possible right now, though? Do you
Yeah, I
see that
mean,
as a real possibility with a lot of these people that literally come at you with insults before they even know you?
yeah, well, I do. I'll give you a couple of examples. As you know, in some ways completely unrelated to the stuff that we're talking about. But I had one time I was showing people how to change their tires, on one of my videos. And the reason why I was doing it is because I was changing like Tesla tires, and just kind of showing people like, you don't need to hire someone. You can do this yourself. And a mechanic chimed in, in the comments and said, "You freaking idiot. That's the stupidest thing." I was showing them how you just sand the rust off, sand the rust off, and then it won't stick anymore. Well, he's a mechanic. He's quite knowledgeable, and he's like, "You're doing the opposite of what you should be doing. When you sand that down to bare metal, it's going to rust all the faster and all the easier. This is the stupidest video I've ever seen." And I said, "Thank you for your thoughtful comment. I didn't know that. Wow. Could you recommend, is there something I could do to mitigate the damage I've done to my wheel hubs?" And he was like, "Well, man, like you certainly take criticism well. Yeah, I'd recommend either this grease or, this copper stuff or this silver stuff." And I was like, "Oh, which one do you think is better?" "Well, the copper stuff. And so I bought it and I redid my video. I was like, "Well, actually, this guy chimed in. He said this would be a good idea." Well, he's a
Yeah, but
father now.
that was something that, he actually
Right.
had a value to add, right?
Yeah,
When
yeah.
people are talking about Jewish space lasers burning down Hawaii, it's a little different.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get you. I get you. That's a very concrete, very simple example. It's not really entrenched in our hearts or our
Like I've been
attitude.
trying the
Yeah.
nice and kind way, and I
Yeah,
still
yeah.
really I still keep my calm, in comparison to a lot of other people. But I've been trying the nice and kind way, and trying with compassion and love for a long time, really since 2016, since I started noticing what was happening, in the underground pits of the internet. And now it's this huge phenomenon, and I've been trying. I have been trying with love and kindness for 8 years, and I've
Yeah.
gotten nowhere.
Well, I'll tell you, like with some of the more deeply entrenched kind of political perspectives, and I've had a number of them. I mean, I'm getting, I get messages from climate deniers every day, and it, what my approach doesn't always work for sure, but I've had a good number of cases where they'll say, "You know what, I I don't I'm just saying what they say." They'll say, "I don't usually hear such respect from the left. Thank you for the respectful conversation. Thank you for hearing me out. You just got yourself another follower." So it doesn't happen all the time. I wish it did, but it happens enough that it has convinced me that that's the way I need to be. I need to learn from these people. Like, what gave you that idea? Like, why do you feel that?
Yeah.
I need to get that from them. I need to
I
It's
hear
mean,
that.
I try that all the time too. Don't
Yeah,
get me
yeah,
wrong. I try that, and if their comment is respectful, I will respectfully ask them to, provide me some sources, or where did they hear that? Where did they get their information? But there's a lot of comments that just start off with just plain insults, and so that those are not the people you can have nice conversations with, even though I've still tried, and it doesn't really work. So I don't know. Again, I'm at this weird point where I don't really know how to handle it in terms of what we can do to collectively handle this like massive cognitive dissonance that we're seeing everywhere.
yeah, yeah. No,
yeah.
I think it's a huge issue, and I've got a video, kind of in production, kind of addressing this, because I think it's just um, um, such a massively important issue. Beyond climate change, it's probably the single most important issue, and that's the polarization of society. And
Yeah.
I want to more or less kind of make the point to folks that I'm discussing right now, that mutual respect is the only path forward. It's the only one. As unpalatable and unrealistic as that might seem, it's the only one. We can't hope to like, well, let's have a war and I hope our side will win. Because both sides think they're going to win, and in the end, no one's going to win from a culture war. So the point that I want to make is that really what's happening is people are they're getting kind of absorbed into these echo chambers. The term in science is homophily, where people who have like ideas tend to congregate. And the reason why I think I can kind of contribute to that conversation is I've been one of those guys. I've basically been a cult member. Now, in my case, I got sick 12 years ago. And so I got cancer. And that it just so happened that my father insisted just a few months prior that I watch this video, this kind of underground, one of these underground conspiracy theory type videos. It was talking all about how, oh, the medicals, the allopathic medical system couldn't, they could cure cancer if they wanted, but there's just too much money being made in treating cancer without curing it, and you can't trust your medical doctors. You've got to go this other way. You've got to go the alternative way. And I got sucked 100% into that culture. And for 5 months, I risked my life to try to cure cancer naturally. And so I completely came to learn how a person, and I'd like to consider myself a reasonable, well-educated kind of person, but even myself, I got sucked in whole hog. I mean, I risked my life. And I owe my life to the people who didn't give up on me and said, Art, come on, man. This isn't working. Like, I was dying. And in my video, again, like I was saying to you, Moose, earlier, if I have a way of proving something, I'm going to do it. And so I'm going to show like a horrific picture of myself when I was a dying man. And I was allowing myself to die. I was allowing the father of my children to die because I believed so emphatically, so unwaveringly in this notion that I had been brainwashed into believing. And so it can happen to anybody, but I got out of it. And today I like to use that experience to provide a little more sympathy to folks who have been brainwashed, essentially been brainwashed by, sad to say it, but most of what we're talking about here is corporations, big money.
Yeah.
So I can have some sympathy for those folks. I can have some compassion for those folks because I was one of them. I saw how it happens, and it starts with somebody you know and respect introducing you to that culture, and then you get a little bit immersed into it, and then that person introduces you to something else, who introduces you to something else, who introduces you to something else. Now you're reading books, you're buying books, you're going to the conferences, you're getting your book autographed by this guy, and now you're sucked completely into it. And that's what happens. And then you only hear ideas that reinforce the ideas that you have.
I mean, I understand the psychology behind it, and I want to say that I'm super grateful that, you got out of that mindset and healed yourself. That's amazing, and I'm so, so grateful to hear that. But now, like, imagine those 5 months being a full 8 years.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like the issue is just so much bigger. And you also had people that were close to you that pulled you out of it, and
That
you
is
had
true.
familiarity with them,
That is
right?
true.
Whereas
Yeah.
when we're dealing with this collective issue, it's families and communities that believe it together. So
Yeah.
they don't have people that are close, that are family, that are, very few of them do,
Yeah.
that actually have these really close familiar connections with people that think differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And especially because we've become so polarized, like most liberals, let's not even call them liberals, because technically, basically anybody that doesn't vote conservative right now, they're all okay with each other. They're building their communities.
Mhm.
Conservatives are building their communities. We're
Mhm.
so divided that it's hard to find this like familiar common middle ground like we used to in those types of situations
Mhm.
where it was like one person kind of went off and started believing in these conspiracy theories, but there was still enough people that were familiar enough to be able to pull them out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to your point, uh, and again, I wish I could say, oh, well, here's the prescription. This is 100% what we have to do, and then we're all going to be okay. I mean, we're all in kind of new territory here in terms of the degree of
Very
polarization.
new territory, never
Yeah.
seen before in human history.
Yeah.
Territory.
So, but again, I would go back to the mutual respect, and I would talk about how when I was immersed in my own kind of cult-like, experience, the way I started getting out of it was really there were little chinks in the armor of this theory that everybody had in this kind of conspiratorial world of alternative medicine, and you can't trust Western medicine, and they're all out to get us, and all this kind of stuff. And so I'd start thinking about things like, well, wait a minute, wouldn't you make a lot more money if you could cure cancer? Because it's not like these doctors and surgeons and so on are creating cancer. Cancer is just in our society. My goodness, if you could cure it, you could charge people whatever you wanted, and they'd pay it. So I started to just question this notion that, well, they could cure it, but they just don't, because there's too much money being made in people being sick. I'd start questioning things like, well, wait a minute, if you could cure cancer with cucumbers and seaweed and wheatgrass, where's all the people who have been cured that way? Why haven't I've been looking and looking and looking. I haven't met one. And when some of these folks, some of these videos and authors and so on that I'd be watching, there's this one video that my dad made me watch just months before I was diagnosed. I would sit there and watch that video over and over and over again. I hung on every word that was in it, every guest that was interviewed, every doctor that was interviewed. But they'd say some things that didn't add up. Like, well, everyone who pursues, traditional Western medicine of surgery and radiation and chemotherapy, they're all dead within 5 years. And then I'd think, well, wait a minute. I know lots of people who were diagnosed with cancer 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. They're still around. So I started to question. And then, of course, for me, you were talking about the 8-year time scale. For me, I was in it for 5 months. I had a very pressing timeline. I was going to die if I didn't do something. So, I had
Yeah,
that
so that was
that
more of a
bad
motivation as well, right? To
yeah,
start
yeah,
looking
Yeah.
for outside information.
yeah. But it was kind of like a house of cards in my mind that just slowly started to fall apart. It slowly started to weaken. And then when it finally collapsed, it was all at once. And I said to my wife, May, can you email that surgeon, that surgeon who I never forgot and I owe my life to, who said to me, when she met me, and she said, well, you're a grown man. I can't tell you what to do, but you appear to have curable colon cancer. So if you change your mind, here's my card. And so I said to my wife, May, can you email that? I was so down the rabbit hole. I wouldn't even talk Like I didn't want to talk or email these doctors, but I'd get my wife to do, So she emailed that surgeon, and that surgeon emailed back right away and said, "I remember your husband. I had always hoped our paths would cross again." So yeah, like what I'm hoping is that folks who are down the rabbit hole, and they're in the echo chambers, and they're feeding off each other and reinforcing each other's views. I'd like to believe that there are little chinks in the armor somewhere, some things that they're already starting to question. And if we're going to get them to finally, poke their head out of the rabbit hole and take a look around at, I suppose, what we would define as the real world, we're not going to do that with any kind of animosity or disrespect, but rather with some loving compassion, and some understanding. So,
For sure.
as difficult as that might seem, we're all people first, and I'd like to believe that we have a lot more in common than we don't.
For sure.
Okay,
And I think,
so I had a different experience with naturopaths and chemo and radiation and cancer.
Yeah.
And the reason that I had a different experience is because I used the naturopathic methods, and he was a naturopathic doctor, not just somebody selling oils, right? But I used them to counteract the effects of my cancer treatment.
Yeah. I hear you.
And it worked very well.
Yeah.
But what would not work was curing my cancer.
Right.
That was not going to happen. And by the way, I had a naturopath before I was diagnosed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I believe in natural, right? I don't discount it.
Yeah.
But it has to be used for what it can be used for. And the whole thing about they have a cure and blah, 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 blah. Whenever I hear that, here's my one question to these people.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of Steve Jobs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, that's a really good point right
He
there.
would have found it.
Because if anybody could have afforded that,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
He could afford it.
And he would have
he's not
leveraged his
here.
connections, and he would have found it. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
110%.
So
Yeah,
he's
and-
not
and-
here, right? But we are.
And that's one thing we need to remember to keep in context and remember where there are absolutely things that going a natural route can do, and there's a lot that you can do naturally, absolutely. But in terms of stuff, there's a line, and at the same time, we still need to listen to medical professionals overall.
Yeah.
My
and
naturopathic doctor, while he was treating me, his wife had cancer as well.
Mhm.
Now, she did not have my blood cancer, right? She had a different kind of cancer, but he was treating her. And while I was going through chemo, he lost her.
Oh my goodness.
So now the question is, would she still be here had she been sitting in the hospital getting chemo too?
Yeah.
The sad
And
part.
you don't know, right? Seriously? You don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, right?
No, absolutely, right. And I'll use a lot smaller scale for an example. Definitely smaller scale, but milkweed. I remember growing up as a kid, and I had warts on my knee really bad. And milkweed was actually something that my mom would cut a piece of milkweed, and the milk that come out, you rub it on the wart, and it would actually help to. Um,
That's cool.
so there absolutely is things that we can do naturally, and I'd say there's bigger scales, or bigger scale things that we can say natural ways absolutely can help, right? But
Hey,
And you
listen,
know what?
some of the stuff that my naturopath made me, I would read, right? What's in this? There was pine extract, there was rose hip, right? There was no question a lot of extremely natural ingredients in
Yeah,
this
yeah.
thing, right?
Mhm.
And it worked better than the meds that they were giving me.
Yeah, yeah. And to your point, because I want to make sure I get this out there, um, because when I talk about this, which is rare, I rarely talk about it, but I've kind of decided uh, a couple of days ago that there's enough on the line in terms of the polarization of society that Frontline was talking about there. I think there's enough on the line that this is something I could do. So I'm going to share that story, and I'm going to talk about how people can get sucked into kind of a conspiratorial group, and then they'll just start reinforcing their ideas. But
Listen,
anyways,
I've
I
been
do like.
sharing my cancer stuff for years now, right? I'm
Yeah, yeah.
10 years into cancer, and I just got remission this year, the beginning of this year. But
Congrats.
Great to
thanks.
hear.
I've been sharing this stuff, right? And I hear from those crazy people
Mm-hmm.
telling me, all I need is this. All you got to
Yeah,
try this.
yeah,
Joe
yeah.
Tippins was one of them. You've
Mm-hmm.
heard of Joe Tippins, right?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, he's got a cure for cancer, but only on TikTok,
Oh, of
Oh
course.
right?
yeah, of
This
course. Yeah.
person does not exist anywhere else in the world
Yeah,
except
yeah.
Yeah.
on TikTok, right?
I came across those folks too, and it's so disheartening when I look back. You get a line on this clinic in Germany or whatever, and then it would just turn out to be, they'll charge you a whole bunch of money, and not, nothing really happens. But what I do want to just get out there is, to this day, when I do talk about this, I'll always throw in the caveat that, hey, you know what? I did really well. And I did do all this natural stuff for 5 months. So how can I ever know that maybe that set me up for success? Maybe taking all that,
I
European mistletoe injections, like IV and vitamin C IV, and all I did like the craziest stuff.
Chelation? You did chelation?
I did various types of chelation. I
Yeah.
had, to your point, I had all my like lead fillings in my mouth
Right. Yeah.
removed. I
Gotcha.
like get all the heavy metals and stuff. Oh yeah, I did anything I could think of, but I was still dying. Like maybe it helped in some respects. Maybe I would have died in that 5 month period of time had I not done that stuff. And maybe it set me up so that once I had that tumor removed, that now my body was in a state that I could recover.
So are you
I could never
NED
really
right
know.
now?
Pardon
Are you
me?
no evidence of disease right now?
Yeah, yeah.
You are.
Complete. I got the cure stamp like 7 years ago.
Okay.
5, 6,
All
7.
right.
Yeah.
So what you're telling me is they have a
Knock
cure
on
for
wood.
cancer,
Yeah. Pardon me.
right?
What was that?
What you're telling me is that they have a cure for cancer.
No, no.
Yes,
Because
you did. Yes, you
well,
did. You
when
are right
people,
now, you are not listening. Right now,
yeah,
you are no evidence of disease.
yeah,
Previous, you
yeah,
had cancer. So
yeah.
are you saying that they did not cure your cancer?
Well, what I'm going to remind you of is what that surgeon said to me. Even before she operated on me, she looked at my CT scan and she said, you appear to have curable colon cancer. So if you change your mind, here's my card."
Right.
So I had curable colon cancer. And knock on wood, I'll always knock on wood when I say this, it appears that it's been cured. That doesn't mean that all cancer is curable. So, and
Okay, so
that's of
before
course
you
what
go
you
any
imply
further
when you
on that,
say,
no,
that's what
before
you
you go
imply
any
when you
further on
say,
that,
well, hold on. That's what you imply when you say they have a cure for cancer,
no,
because
I
they
don't I don't
don't.
imply
They
things like
don't.
that. I was merely pointing out that they do, in fact, have a cure for cancer if you define the type of cancer.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So there
Exactly.
was the point, okay? That was the point. So what I'm saying is that when people tell you they have a cure for cancer, you should say, yeah,
Yeah. What type? Yeah, yeah,
because I got it. It's
yeah, yeah,
called science,
yeah, 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 yeah.
right?
Um,
Now, I will never have that. I have blood cancer.
mm-hmm.
Okay. There is no cure for blood cancer.
Yeah, yeah,
All right. So I do, in fact, have an incurable cancer,
exactly. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But
As
I'm in remission.
yes.
Okay. So what that means is that they've been able to halt the advance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So is that a cure? No. Would I be better off without this? Oh my God, no. I was so grateful to get into chemo,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
I put it off for as long as I could. But then I reached a point where it was like, I can't keep doing this. I need to get in, right? So I started my chemo actually a couple months earlier than I was expecting to,
nice.
because I
Yeah.
could feel it advancing.
Oh,
So while yeah, they do have a cure for cancer, it just depends on the kind of cancer you're
yeah, yeah,
speaking of.
yeah. Exactly, exactly. Yeah, and there's no rhyme or reason. It's all just this weird cosmic roll of the dice. You know, some
Absolutely.
people are lucky, some people aren't, and I
Well,
wish I could understand why the universe is the way it is. But there
Art,
you go.
I want to say thank you for sharing all that. After what you said in terms of you haven't really shared much about it, I thank you so much for giving us more perspective on um, that aspect of your life and how that kind of molded how you changed your perspective on things because of it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I can no longer go around just thinking, well, my way is, you know, what I think is right and what other people think is wrong. And like, I, I, you know, if I ever get accused of like, well, you just want to be right all the time. I always say, actually, that's 100% true. I do. But my commitment to being right means that I have to admit if I'm wrong. So at the
Absolutely.
end of the day, I just want to be right. It's
Yeah.
true. But that means that sometimes I have to go, oh damn, I was wrong about that.
Yeah,
But
and we have
now
to
I'm going to
admit
get
we're
on side and I'm going to like I'm going to advocate for something else that is right. You know, and if
absolutely.
something else comes along to make to convince me that okay, maybe I was wrong about that,
Yeah.
I'll hey man, I'll switch sides. Like I say, I used to be a conservative. I'll switch sides. I just want to be right. You know, and I think everybody should be that way, you know?
Absolutely. Okay, guys. So I am gonna wrap it up here in a minute, but Miss Radical, you just came up. Is there anything you wanted to kind of add at the end here before we do wrap up,
Ms.
Miss
Radical.
Radical?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
Oh,
I
something's
hear
going on
that.
with your mic,
I
I
hear that
think,
mic coming on.
and she
Mm.
might be having issues with her mic, guys.
Technical issues. Is what I'm thinking. Well, Moose, this has been great. She's trying. Ms. Radical is trying. She sounds like she's in a swimming pool.
Does
What do
it?
you?
Oh,
Hey,
there
Oh,
you
there
there
we
go.
she is.
go.
Okay. I just wanted to say I really appreciate you being out here and talking about your commitment to being able to change. Because I was, there was a season in my life where I really, I call it a season where I really like conservatism really resonated with me,
Mm-hmm.
and it hit home in a way. And I remember after Obama got elected, I was so stoked that Obama got elected, and I
Oh,
said to
yes.
somebody I love that was very conservative, I said, this is such a great thing. And they looked at me and they said, America will never survive having a man of color in office. And I thought,
Wow.
what a horrible thing to say, And it was those moments, you know when I got online one time and I got excited about reconciliation and Stephen Harper, and I said something, and somebody that I respected said, "Whoa, you got to go back out and check those things." And I spent a little bit of time clutching my pearls and being offended that they didn't align with me 100%. And, you know, then I did some research and asked myself some big questions as to why they didn't align and why they felt the way they felt. And I didn't spend a lot of time being embarrassed. I remember just spending a lot of time checking myself.
Right.
So I appreciate that about you, because I don't find that I see that often.
Right. No, I hear you. And I think that's something that if we can offer that in our interactions with anyone, but especially, more conservative folks, then that's a really great thing that we can do to make this world a better place.
Definitely, because politics isn't a football sport.
Mm.
It's not something that you align with and you're like, well, my colors are red and white forever. Politics has really played seasons in my life.
Yeah.
When I was young and rebellious, I aligned more with a liberal. When I got my first jobs, I aligned more with NDP. When I started having my family and taking my kids to church, like conservatism spoke to me. When I
I
got a
got
little
you.
bit older and life happened, the left, for lack of a better word, or progressive, kind of started to resound more with me.
You
Yeah,
know what?
guys.
Yeah. We need to treat political parties like phone companies. I'll jump phone companies, twice a week to get a better deal,
Well, and
Right. Yeah.
that's the biggest thing, right? Because we need to remember that over time, it's not just us who changes. It's the politics that change too. The parties change their politics over time,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like, look at the conservatives have definitely gone way more kind of right wing conspiracy as opposed to what they were even 5 years ago.
Yeah, the same. My dad isn't the same kind of conservative. Like, it's not the same party that it was of my dad's.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
my
yeah,
dad
Yeah.
is an oil and gas guy, and he can't, in good conscience anymore, vote conservative.
Yeah. Yeah. Here you.
Kills him,
absolutely.
but he can't.
Yeah. It's not the John Diefenbaker conservative party
Right.
anymore.
Absolutely, guys. So with that, I do want to wrap up, guys. My battery's running pretty low, unfortunately.
Okay,
But I
folks,
want to
take care of
thank,
this.
take care, Michael. Thanks for coming up. I do want to thank everyone for coming. Art, you've been fantastic, and I was really looking forward to this conversation, and I am not disappointed. This was fantastic. Thank you so much.
No, no,
Uh,
thank you, Moose.
Guys, if you haven't yet, make sure you follow Art. And Art, for everyone that's still here, please let us know before we go. Where can we find your content? Clearly here on TikTok, but tell us where else we can find you.
Yeah, yeah. So if you look up either Art Lightstone or Green Neighbor, spelled the Canadian way, neighbor. I should have thought that through before I committed to that name. But I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, and YouTube is really my biggest platform because I'm kind of more of a filmmaker type guy than a social media fellow. The kind of things that I do, I can't churn out like 3 times a day. You know what I mean? And that's what that yeah. So that's why I don't do so well on the social media type platforms because they want you to use their app to make your content, and I just can't do the stuff that I do with the Instagram app or the TikTok app. But yeah, that's where you'll find me. Green Neighbor, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, LinkedIn. There you go.
Awesome. Well, guys, he says that, and I can tell you right now, I prefer his videos the way they are. Just saying, because when you go check out his content, because when you go look at it, like I like to say, he's got the receipts. It's informative. He's got the information, the evidence to back up what he says. He takes the time to lay it all out in front of you. And I mean, the production of his videos is fantastic. It to me, for it's on the professional level. So definitely make sure you go check him out, support him, follow him where you can, and just give him the love and let's help bolster his voice and make it a part of the collective.
Well, thank you so much, Moose. This has been a lot of fun.
Really has been. Art, you have a fantastic night and a great week, and hopefully we'll chat again soon.
All righty, Moose. Take care. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much for joining in.
Awesome, guys. Have a good night. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and join again next week. Don't know what's going
Thank
on
you.
yet.
Great show.
Thanks, Miss Radical. I really appreciate you coming out. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
All right, guys. I'll see you next week.